Hello, and welcome to Part 2 of War Thunder's Air Realistic Battles Guide. It's time to talk about fighter combat in slightly more depth than Part 1, as we move towards more and more advanced and mindful play. So, let's get into it. What do I mean by 102? Well, when you're taking classes in college or other institutions, normally 101 is the first class, and 102 is the one that goes right after the first class, explaining something a little bit less basic, building on the basics of 101. For this series, I decided that the general concept of, climbing, engaging from advantage was the real core and most basic concept of how to not be bad at War Thunder. And Video 1 spent a huge amount of time talking about that and honestly going into not even necessary detail about the idea of getting an advantage, engaging, and then trying to find an advantage again. So that was 101, but now it's time to move to 102. And I was torn on what was most important to go to next. I considered moving to a more conceptual look at how an air realistic battle plays out, and who you should and should not engage first, where you should be in the flow of the battle, the phases of the game, how the win conditions work. Either that or how to fight one player in a greater level of depth, a more detailed look at a one-on-one fight. And I've decided that if you have neither of those two skills, fundamental 1v1 fight skill and fight decision making is going to be more important than wider game sense in a team or map setting, if you have neither. So in video 3, we will be talking about the flow of a game and decision making as you play. But this second video is still going to be focused just on you are in an airplane, you are facing an enemy in an airplane. How do you win? So, let's move along. Before moving on, be capable of basic play. If you've spent, a 3-digit number of hours in AirRB, this is probably already you by a wide margin. I'm going to assume from here on out that you know how to basically play in a simple way. To take off and land, climate match start, know that having altitude is a good thing and that is an advantage, know how to not rip your wings off, know how to have a preference to avoid head-ons. You don't have to be perfect at evading every head-on, but have a preference to avoid them for now. And then know how to free camera. This is something I did not emphasize enough during the first video. Being able to, using the key that unbinds your camera pivot from moving your airplane and looking behind yourself, looking above yourself, looking below yourself, looking around as you do things, is so important. We'll talk about this more, but if you're not already doing that, you need to start getting used to doing that. So, let's talk about basic evasion. This is something we glossed over in video 1, because if you start from a huge advantage, the number of times you need to perform an evade is not too high. But evasion and defensive play are important, and we're going to cover them in much more depth later. But for now, you should know how to do a basic evade. And the most basic kind of evasion is one where an enemy is flying towards you trying to kill you, and you make some kind of turn. You make a sharp turn that is hard to aim at. And you can see I have this beautiful diagram in the bottom right, the real pinnacle of art right here. If somebody's diving on you and you're seeing the front of their plane because they are pointing their guns at you, planes have an easier time going up than down. Like when you're going to make a sharp turn, you don't put your nose down, you put your nose up, because most prop planes are designed to go up more easily than they go down, to turn upwards in a positive G direction. So if somebody's diving on you and you go up, they will have an easy-ish time pivoting upwards and aiming at you, even though you're evading. But if you go underneath them, it's harder to go down, especially if you're in a high-speed pass. And the higher the speed you go at for most aircraft, the less responsive your controls are. So for now, if you're going to evade, somebody's flying at you, they're diving on you, whatever, and you have the ability to make a sharp turn, the one that will be generally hardest for most players to follow is one that goes underneath their nose, somewhere under. instead of somewhere above. And we'll talk about this in more depth later. Again, good players will already know that this is an extremely oversimplified way to talk about evasion. But it's for now, underneath is more safe, and it can be a good default way to evade, to go under. And also, what annoys you? When you are diving on somebody, you should have experience by now shooting at people, and they dodge. Think about when you're coming in to shoot at somebody, what bothers you? What is hard to aim at? Whatever they did, you can try doing that. That's a concept not just in War Thunder, but in almost all player versus player games. If you're playing against somebody in a game, and they do something that is super annoying, and that you have trouble dealing with, strongly consider learning how to do whatever that is yourself, because that will make you a stronger player, and then you can take it further. And if you do that, and then somebody does something that counters the annoying thing, well, then you can learn to do that one, and you keep stepping up. Also, when you're evading, don't just you have to full commit to this. There are times, again, this gets more complicated. There are times when you can make a shallower turn and get away with it. But if you're not sure how sharply you need to turn to evade, turn as sharply as possible. You're trying to put your plane, you're trying to make it the case that from their point of view, you are changing your angle super rapidly, and you're really hard to keep a mouse pointer on or to keep the nose of a plane on. So, really commit to it, really throw them around. And then also evade before they actually fire guns. If somebody's diving on you, don't wait until the tracers are zooming past your wings or causing you some damage to make an evasive movement. When people are 1.5, 1.2 kilometers away, right, when they're getting into gun range but not there yet, you can consider making evasive actions even then. You don't want to make it too early. If you make it too early, they will just adjust as they come in and have plenty of time. But again, with experience, you will learn this. There is a good window of time before they are ready to fire, but after they're already kind of locked into their course, when you can make an evade that will be effective and that they can't just trivially pivot onto. So, be aware of evading is a good thing. It's something you'll have to do. Whether or not I teach you it, you're going to figure this out. But those are some notes on evasion. Now let's talk about energy. And this is important to know. If you're going to take fights in War Thunder mindfully and with a plan beyond just I'm going to point my nose at the enemy until I have managed to kill them, you have to be aware of what energy is in the context of aviation or a plane's, physical state. So energy is speed and or altitude. You can convert altitude into speed by going down. You can convert speed into altitude by going up. Altitude is stored energy. This is kind of like kinetic and potential energy. Second grade physics here. Science class. If you put a weight at the top of a shelf, it has the potential to fall down, and that's going to be gaining speed on the way down, which is kinetic energy. Your plane is a big, heavy object. It's made of metal or wood or whatever. It's a big, heavy object. And if you put it high in the sky, it has the potential to go down and to get a lot of speed and momentum and energy as it does so. So a plane at high altitude, even if it's not going fast at the moment, it's in a high energy state. It has a lot of stored energy. Similarly, a plane at low altitude but at a very high speed is also in a somewhat high energy state, because if you have a ton of speed, even if you're not at high altitude yet, you could point your nose up and gain some altitude. So yeah, energy is speed and altitude. Speed is energy currently being used to do something. This gets a little bit more into theory, but if you need to do something like make an evasive turn, or sharply change the angle you're flying at, it's hard to do that with low speed, because the more speed you have, the more air you have going over your control surfaces, and the more responsive your plane is, up to a point. But certainly your optimal climb speed is not going to be your most responsive speed for doing things actively. So throughout a game, you will convert your stored energy and altitude into currently being used energy, usable energy and speed, and then you do something with it. So many of the actions you do in a fight cost energy. If you make an attack pass on somebody and you wiggle your nose around and, aim at a few different spots, try to track their evasion as you do so, doing that costs energy. You're going to end up in a lower energy state than if you had just kept climbing and not dived on them at all. Same if you evade. If you make an evasive turn to avoid dying, I mean, it's always better to be in a lower energy state than to be dead, of course. But that turn costs energy. If you make a turn, you're throwing your plane around a curve, you are spending some of your altitude and or speed to do that. So you've spent energy on actions once you do them. This is a pretty confusing topic for new players. This nebulous idea of energy and that there's energy states and high and low energy states and how to read them. This is complicated stuff, and it will take you time to get used to this. But just know for now that when I say energy, I mean speed and or altitude. I'm not talking about like storing lightning in your airplane or like some nebulous magic power. I'm talking about speed and or altitude. Physical states a plane can be in. That's energy. And now what is a fight? What is an engagement in this game? In video 1, we narrowly defined engaging an enemy as attacking them from a position of extreme advantage from above. But this is not every fight. And even in the example games I played, there were a couple of fights where I was not attacking the enemy from an extreme advantage. You're not always going to get that chance. You will create that chance for yourself fairly often if you properly climb from the start of the game, but not always. So it's time to expand our definition of a fight to include many different possible kinds of fights. Our new definition is any situation where you perform actions with the intent to kill an enemy, or they perform actions with the intent to kill you. And this doesn't mean actions with the intent to kill each other right at this moment. If I see somebody 5 kilometers away and I nose down towards them thinking they're my next target, that's already the start of a fight, as we see it here. And same if they start gradually moving towards you. If you think that they are setting up to fight you, to dogfight you, to shoot you, the fight has already begun. And so we're defining a fight now as a time when you intend to kill someone or they intend to kill you, and you've done something. You haven't just looked and continued climbing. One of you or both of you have actually moved your planes in such a way that you're making decisions, you're changing course, you're starting the engagement, one or both. And we're going to still assume for now that you're engaging in a one-on-one fight. How to win a 1 versus 2 and 1 versus 3, like 1 versus multiple enemies, that's hard stuff. And it's not really suitable for this beginner to intermediate discussion of fighting in War Thunder. Do know that the better you get at 1 versus 1s, the better you'll get at 1 versus multiple enemies, because normally the way you fight multiple enemies is by fighting them in sequence, or by getting them into a position where you can treat them as the same plane, because they're coming from the same angle or something like that. Totally doable stuff, but we'll be talking about that significantly later. For now, we're going to assume it's still a 1 versus 1 engagement, and many of the principles we talk about here are going to be useful against multiple enemies if you do see them. So, we have 2 more rules for all fights. We talked about, a 6-step process in video 1. By now, honestly, that 6-step process was fine, but you should be fairly comfortable with that as kind of a loop, where you smoothly go from advantage to engage, to lining up, to shooting, to continuing, to getting out. That's all kind of like a seamless loop of just playing against somebody. Now we're going to talk about some more concepts to constantly keep in mind and perform during a fight. So, fighting rule number 1, stay aware. If you know where your enemy is and what they're doing, that's a lot better than not knowing what they're doing. So whether you're in front of the enemy or behind, if you're behind, it's normally pretty easy to tell what's happening, where your enemy is, because you're looking at them. But if they're behind you, you need to use your free camera. You need to check behind, every once in a while, you need to check behind yourself, check up, check down. You need to be able to look at your enemy and know where they are and what they're trying to do to you, even if you are not currently aiming at them with your default view. This is much easier on offense than defense. Free camera is extremely important. don't do this in a way that interrupts your flying. If you are like so busy free cameraing behind yourself that you are not making a turn and you're just a sitting duck, that's bad. It would be better to stay in front in normal view only and actively fly than be super passive and use your free camera. But it's going to become important to use your free camera no matter what. You will, if you start experimenting with it and using it sometimes, you will rapidly realize how big of a deal it is and how helpful it is, and you'll just tend towards using it more because of how much fun it is to know where people are and play against them. This is also yet another reason to use manual elevator. If you can manually hold down your elevator key to turn upwards or turn in towards somebody instead of having to drag your mouse, it frees you up to free camera towards wherever you want as you're in the middle of an elevator turn. Super useful. You really should be using manual elevator. I think it would be a very questionable decision to not use manual elevator at this point. If you're interested enough in being good at War Thunder to watch this video, you should be interested enough to set up manual elevator. It's definitely worth it. Fighting rule number 2. Always keep enough energy. So whether you're attacking or defending, you should always retain the ability to do something, to change your course of action, to make a decision, to make a play. Like I said before, most actions in a fight cost energy. Turning takes some of your speed and altitude. Attacking, aiming your nose somewhere takes some of your speed, probably. The main way you can fully run out of energy is to already be at a low speed and to angle upwards. This risks a stall, even if you don't fully stall out. Going slowly upwards is a very dangerous state. If somebody were to dive on you and attack you and you're still at 250 kph in the middle of climbing, you're probably going to die, because even if you try to make a sharp turn, if you're making a sharp turn at a super low speed, that's easy to aim at. Because even if you're going upside down backwards, if it's super slow, it's pretty easy to just, they can just put their nose down onto that. They can just aim at it. Of course, if your choices are to keep enough energy or to die, avoid death. If you need to stall out as the only possible way to evade a given movement or to not hit the ground, avoid death. This rule is pretty complex. It's more complex than don't stall out. It means to always keep enough energy to perform the next action you might need. That might be way, way over stall speed. It might be, for some planes, it might be holding 450 kilometers an hour so that you can make a really sharp turn that's more optimal for your plane. It's a complicated topic, but for example, if you're fighting somebody and you're both looping vertically around each other, and if you follow them up into the loop, you're going to slow down so much that you are close to a stall, I wouldn't try to loop. I would go a little bit more to the side and try to come around on the side. So don't take actions that make you so slow or lacking energy that you can't do anything. You need to always, if possible, retain the ability to do things, to change your course, to use your control surfaces. So hold energy all the time, if you can. And now that we know what energy is and what a fight is, we can talk about this term, energy fighting. This is honestly a term I dislike, and let me explain why. It is very common in the War Thunder community for players to talk about energy fighting as a play style, or to talk about energy fighters as a type of plane. And normally what they mean is something like a boom and zoom aircraft, like an aircraft that emphasizes use of speed and altitude over directly, turning in loops around somebody. But I don't like this term energy fighting or energy fighter, because even if you are in a Turnfighter, no matter what plane you're in, you are using energy in some way, and you should be aware of energy. Every plane is an energy fighter in the sense that they all can convert altitude into speed, which is energy. They can all gain energy by going up. There are some that rely more on this concept of using energy states versus just aiming or maneuvering. But the distinction is, where would you draw the line? Some people say the BF-109 is an energy fighter. Some people say the Yak-3 is an energy fighter. But then the Spitfire is not an energy fighter. Well, I think the Spitfire is, not any less of an energy fighter than a yak. You know, like it's very confusing. It's not well defined. Every plane uses energy. If we have this idea of energy fighting and non-energy fighting, we might foolishly assume that we don't have to worry about energy if we're not in what people call an energy fighter. And so for all those reasons, I'm not going to use the term energy fighting or energy fighter in these guides. You know, if other people want to use them, that's fine. I'm not saying they're terrible. I just think it's more useful to consider every plane an energy fighter of a different kind, and every fight an energy fight. That they can all just take different forms. So, energy fighting, not a term I'll be using. And now let's talk about two main types of fights, or two kind of shapes a fight can take when you're engaging an enemy. There are more than two, frankly, but these are like two kind of broad categories of fight that you will commonly see when two players are engaging each other and they're both in a fighter. The first one's a dogfight. This is pretty obvious. You are both chasing each other around in circles. It may be horizontal, it may be vertical, it may be a spiral. You're both close to each other in a similar energy state, and you are trying to use your maneuverability to aim at your enemy and kill them, and they're trying to do the same to you. This is kind of the obvious form of fight that you see in movies, that everybody goes for when they're new to the game. That works pretty well for some planes, for many planes. I don't think I have too much to say about this. A dogfight is a dogfight. You're both just turning. You're both using the tool of turning and maneuvering to try and get a kill, and you're close to each other. And then the second fight type here, I'll call it asymmetrical. Some people would call this like a boom and zoom fight, or an energy fight. But again, both kinds of fights involve proper use of energy and being aware of it. So I'll just call this asymmetrical because the two players are engaged in very different activities. We have one player above in the plane that goes faster, generally, or the plane that currently has more speed. And they are trying to make an attacking pass on the red enemy below. And the red enemy here turns better, so they have the ability to evade. This may or may not always be the case. You can have an asymmetrical fight where they don't turn any better than you, but they're still taking the role of the evasive player. But generally, this is how fights go between planes that are good at different things. They're not both good at dogfighting. So the one that's less good at dogfighting, the blue one, has to adopt a different tactic, where they make attack passes in a safe way. This one can still be neutral. It might seem here like blue has the advantage, but if you have a good player in a really well-turning evasive fighter and a good player in a boom and zoom, a fast, dive-focused fighter that doesn't want to get stuck in a fight, this cycle of them diving and climbing again and diving and the red player keeps dodging, this can go on for a long time with neither side gaining a significant advantage. So don't think that this is a fight where the player making dive passes or long passes has an advantage over the one evading, necessarily. It can be the case that that's true. But all we're talking about here is where you have different goals. You're trying to fight in different ways, and you're playing against each other in a way that is not just getting stuck together in a dogfight. We will talk about this more as we go along. So which one of those two fight types will happen? When you see a red dot, enemy player, you see their name tag, you select it, you decide to fight them, you should probably already have a sense of which one of these two kinds of fights is likely to happen and what position you're going to be in that fight. And that depends on a lot of factors. Let's talk about those. So I'm generalizing, but for now we're going to say there's three possible starts to a fight in terms of your energy states. Start one is that we have an energy advantage. This is what we talked about in video 1, what we tried to create as much as possible. We are at a higher altitude and or faster than the enemy. They are below us, slower than us. We have the ability to engage them whenever we want, and they do not have the ability to do it back because we are out of their reach. So we'll call this, energy advantage or advantage. Number 2 is a neutral energy state. There were a couple examples of this at the end in the last video. There was, I think, in the Hawker Hurricane example video, there was a fight that was a neutral state start towards the end. You're starting with similar altitudes and speeds. You may or may not be heading towards each other, but you are at similar speed and altitude, and if a fight begins, there's not going to be a huge energy-related advantage for one party. You're starting at fairly equal speeds and altitudes. Then number 3 is energy disadvantage. This is what we didn't really talk about at all in video 1, the idea of somebody attacking you and what you should do when they have an advantage. But this is just being on the opposite side of situation 1, where somebody is above you, faster than you, etc. They come to attack you, and you're at a disadvantage, energy-wise, to start. This is not a guaranteed loss by any means at all, but this is the state of the start of the fight when it first begins. In addition to this, we can't just treat all fighters the same anymore. We didn't really talk about different types of fighter in video 1 because it was beyond the scope of like how to climb, how to have an advantage. But there are many different types of fighter in this game, propeller-driven fighters. There are 3 general categories, though, that I will choose to emphasize. Some people would say there's only 2 categories. There's like a halfway line between Turnfighter and Boom and Zoom. Some people would have far more than 3 categories, and I mean, if you wanted to be as comprehensive as realistically possible, you would consider every individual model of aircraft to be its own category, because none of them are identical, and except for like the Lend-Lease versions of certain planes or whatever. But we're going to use 3 rough categories for now, because this is already getting complicated, and I don't want to overdo the number of categories or labels I put on things, especially when we're trying to be quote-unquote intermediate. So our 3 general categories of fighter we're going to consider are Turnfighter, All-Rounder, and Boom and Zoom. The Turnfighter is like the 0, or maybe the Spitfire goes here too. I would say the Spitfire probably goes here. It's good at turning, but it's slow. So it's slower than the average of what you're facing, better at turning than the average, like much better at turning. One of the best at turning in your matchmaking bracket. Number 2 is the all-rounder. This is a hazy area, but generally I would say planes that are like decent at a lot of things, like they can't outturn the Turnfighters, but they might outspeed them. And they can't necessarily outspeed the Boom and Zooms, but they might, outturn them or outclimb them. So this is a plane that has kind of a balanced mix of attributes. You have the ability to turn against some planes, but not against every possible, the vast majority of planes you're going to face. You're not the absolute best at either speed or turning in this case. You're some kind of plane in between. And I know that's vague, but I think it's a distinct category to be in. You can't always treat every plane as on one of the 2 halves of Turnfighter or Boom and Zoom. Sometimes you deliberately need to adopt a style that makes use of the fact that you are kind of okay at both. And then number 3 is Boom and Zoom. This is the least intuitive kind of plane to fly, and honestly, I would say the hardest, not necessarily the hardest to execute mechanically, but it's one of the harder types of planes to win with, because it's more punishing if you make a mistake to fly a Boom and Zoom aircraft, and this is part of why people struggle with playing the US as a First Nation. You're fast, you're bad at turning, you're often also heavy. There's also often a kind of a subtext that you have a high energy retention here. That's something to talk about later, but for now, Turnfighter, All-Rounder, Boom and Zoom, in order of Turnfighter best at turning but slower, All-Rounder is decent at a lot of things, and Boom and Zoom is fast but bad at turning. Those are the qualities we're going to assume for now. So, when we have 3 possible starts to a fight, and 3 possible kinds of fighters we might be fighting against, this leads to 9 possible kinds of fights that we might find ourselves in, depending on whether we have an advantage, a neutral state, or a disadvantage energy-wise, and which of the 3 plane categories we believe our enemy falls into. If this seems confusing, well, it is, because it's an attempt to turn many hundreds of hours of experience into a slideshow that can tell you about a lot of different possibilities. But trust me, this is not actually as complicated as you might think, And a lot of these categories are going to have similar play approaches. Like if you have the advantage versus a Turnfighter versus, or the advantage versus a B and Z, and you yourself are a Turnfighter, you're going to approach those pretty similarly. In either case, you're going to try and just go down and dogfight them to death. So even though there are many different kinds of fights, we don't necessarily have to have a totally different playstyle for each and every one. We can have, shared actions, shared approaches to things that are used in multiple matchups. We just need to be aware that there are all different kinds of fights that can begin, and we can't do the exact same thing in every one. This is 9 possible kinds of fights when you're flying one kind of plane. Like if we're flying a Turnfighter, we have these 9 possible matchups. But if you were to fly a all-rounder, you have 9 more. And if you have a boom and zoomer, you have 9 more. So really there's 27 possible kinds of fights if we're assuming that we're allowed to ourselves choose between 3 different kinds of plane. But in any given match where you've already picked your plane, you don't change planes in the middle of a fight or a middle of a game. In any given game that you load into as a player, there are 9 possible approximate kinds of engagements that you might see. So let's talk about each one in more detail. Disclaimer. I am talking about ways you can approach a variety of possible fight types. This advice is generalized and subjective, and what actually does and does not work in game depends on many other factors, and the details of specific plane models. I'm trying to give an overview of some of the ways you can engage people and some of the types of engagements you might see in ARB, but I can't give you... It would be impossible in a video of this length to describe how to play every possible plane against every possible enemy airplane in every possible situation. So this is more of a kind of a general sampling of different fight types, different approaches you can take to the fight. Don't come back complaining that the idea of diving away from a Turnfighter didn't work against a specific plane, like a clipped wing Spitfire or an A7M. And they just chased you and killed. Like, there are certain planes that break out of these molds. There are weird things that can happen. This is generalized, conceptual advice that I hope will be somewhat helpful. I'm not writing the War Thunder Bible to the letter. So, Scenario 1. Advantage versus an enemy Turnfighter. So we are above an enemy. We have a big advantage in energy. And we think they are a plane that is a Turnfighter, which is good at turning, pretty bad at going fast. So if we ourselves are a Turnfighter, this is a normal advantaged engagement. We just go commit to the fight, or we can choose to kind of dip in and out. This is comfortable for us. We have no problem with this. We have the energy to create gaps, to leave if we want. We just go fight them. You're a Turnfighter, you have the advantage, they're a Turnfighter. You have an advantage over a similar plane to yourself, just go fight it. If we're an all-rounder, this becomes a little bit more complicated. We can't commit to a full-on dogfight here. We talked about this a little bit in video 1, the idea of if you don't think you turn better than your enemy, don't get stuck in the fight. Your role here actually becomes similar to a B and Z plane, because even though you're an all-rounder, B and Z means boom and zoom, if that wasn't already clear. Boom and zoom, the fast ones that turn badly, B and Z. Boom and zoom is long to say and write, so people say B and Z very, very often. But yeah, if you're an all-rounder, you're kind of inheriting the role of a B and Z plane here, because you cannot win a pure turn fight against a Turnfighter if you're an all-rounder, in most cases. So use your speed and your altitude to make some attack passes while avoiding a dogfight. This, again, is no big problem. It should be pretty comfortable to do. Play safe, you'll get them. And then if you're a boom and zoomer, definitely don't commit to a full-on dogfight, since we're kind of a brick. Use your speed to make attack passes. You should be way faster than a Turnfighter if you're above them and you want to dive on them. So you dive on them, estimate where they're going to go, fire your guns for a bit as you go by, make an attack pass, and then don't turn around to try and dogfight them. Stay going in a straight line and just go up and out of their range. And then once you're way out of their range, you can turn around and do it again. In this case, you are... Remember the asymmetrical fight MS Paint diagram with one person looping below and one person making long straight attacks? In this case, we are the blue plane in that diagram. We are the one making long, straight passes and not getting stuck in a little turning fight. So, advantage versus enemy Turnfighter. Those are some possible ways you can play it. Now, neutral versus enemy Turnfighter. So we are at a similar altitude and speed to an enemy. We believe they are a plane that is a Turnfighter that's good at turning and slow. What if we're a Turnfighter? Well, this is like a fair fight. We start in similar positions. We are in planes with similar capabilities. We're free to engage in a normal fight here. And who wins is going to be determined by many things, by aim, by how we manage our energy once the fight starts, by efficiency, awareness, blah, blah, blah. But this is a normal fight. And I don't think you should shy away from normal fights. Even if you think they're more skilled than you in a normal fight, you will learn things by playing fair fights. Fights against similar planes at similar altitudes. You will realize what does and does not work in them. So I would be inclined to engage in just a nice, normal, fair fight here if we're fighting a fellow Turnfighter and a Turnfighter at a similar speed and altitude. Just don't take the head on as you go in. If you are an all-rounder, this is risky. Even though it's a neutral energy state, we would have a disadvantage engaging in this fight because we don't have the energy to make an attack pass without getting stuck in a dogfight. And if we get stuck against a Turnfighter as an all-rounder that turns a little bit worse, it's not easy to win. So strongly consider declining this engagement, just like not participating in it, by turning away and just leaving. Fighting somebody else yourself, or if they're trying to fight you, just hopefully, normally it's the case that if you're in kind of an all-around plane, you will cruise horizontally a little bit faster than the planes who are good at turning of your same battle rating. So you can normally open a gap by just cruising away and choosing not to engage in a turn fight. But this is I won't go too much into that situation. It can get more complicated. If you're a boom and zoom player, you definitely don't want to take this engagement. You don't want to make a pass on a Turnfighter unless you have significantly higher speed than them. And when I say neutral energy state, I'm not talking about when you're exiting one of your dives, holding horizontal with a ton of speed, and you see a Turnfighter. In that situation, you have a massive energy advantage, and of course you can go and make a gun run on them. I'm talking about when you're in a B and Z, you're climbing or you're cruising, and you see a Turnfighter climbing or cruising, and you're both starting at a similar low-ish speed. You don't want to try to make an attack pass in that situation because you will not have the speed to fly away from them faster than they can turn around and get behind you. So I don't recommend this engagement. I would say decline and turn away here. Now, what if an enemy Turnfighter is above us and wants to cause trouble? This is probably the roughest situation you can have in aerialistic battles. Honestly, having a plane with a big energy advantage over you come and attack you that is also good at maneuvering, this is a rough situation. So if you're a fellow Turnfighter, you have a chance. You have a solid chance here. You can use your own agility to turn this around. If you evade properly, you make them waste energy until they descend to your level. Each time they make an attack run, you make some kind of evasive move, and they have to turn to try to adjust for it, or to, go back up and make another move. They will spend energy on attack attempts, and you are trying to make them waste enough energy that they don't have a huge energy advantage anymore. You make them make an attack run, make a U-turn. Make another attack run, make a U-turn. And eventually there will come a point when they either have to choose to no longer have an energy advantage and just fight you normally, or to leave. And either of those are fine outcomes for a Turnfighter if we're a Turnfighter. Letting them either leave or come into a fairly even fight, those are both good. But the only way you get there is by properly evading. And against really, really good players, that may not even be that doable. So this is rough, but you have a chance for sure. Now, what if we are an all-rounder and there's an enemy Turnfighter above us? Given sufficient warning, you might have time to start an escape dive. So this would be a dive where we go down so fast that the Turnfighter doesn't have the speed to catch us. So if you are in like a P-63, I'll use the 3 planes I talked about before as an example, or that I showed as a diagram. If you're in a P-63 and there's a 0 above you and you think he wants to get feisty, if you start a dive, like you full send a dive downwards, and you're starting to dive past like 700 kilometers an hour, they can't really follow that. I mean, they can eventually come down to you later in the game, but for the time being at least, you can choose to decline the engagement situationally, by using a higher dive speed if you have one. So when they're like 2.5 kilometers away to like when they're pretty far, 2.5, 3 kilometers away more, if you get started on your dive early and you can get to a dive speed that they can't follow, this is a worthwhile way to avoid just, you know, being destroyed by a Turnfighter who already has an energy advantage. And it sucks because you have to give up so much of your energy for this, but it's better to give up a bunch of energy and escape the situation than to die in it. So that's an option. If you don't think you can make an escape dive, if they're already super close, or that you know that they're one of the Turnfighters that happens to also have a good dive speed, or that they're like, you know, this becomes a hazy line. Some planes are kind of in the Turnfighter category, like a clipped wing Spitfire is, most people consider Spitfires a Turnfighter, and they're kind of right. But a Spitfire that has clipped wings can also dive extremely well, and if you're up against that in an all-rounder that can't outdive it or outturn it, then diving is not a valid way to escape anymore, and things become very awkward. So if escape's not possible by diving, you can try to make like a single drastic kill maneuver. You can do something where you dive for a bit and then try to pull up for like coming up from underneath, a weird shot angle, something very daring. Something with flap usage, you can try using your combat flaps to make an unexpected move. You could even try a head-on. Like, honestly, if you're in an all-rounder plane and there's a skilled enemy Turnfighter that you believe is going to mess you up if you let the fight turn into a normal dogfight, it may be better. Here's the situation where it might be okay to risk the head-on if you think the only other alternative is to get stuck in a turn fight that you know you will not win, if no other option seems apparent. And then if you're in a boom and zoom plane and enemy Turnfighter comes in, you have a pretty fair chance to escape by dive speed here, depending on your plane and what position you're in. If it's not possible, you're just kind of stuck in the same position as the all-rounder. Do what you can. Again, this is like the roughest situation in the whole game, is energy disadvantage versus a plane that has speed on you by virtue of being higher, and also has maneuverability on you unless you're a Turnfighter by virtue of being a Turnfighter. This is rough. Ideally you avoid even getting into this position to begin with. But we'll be talking about how to avoid ending up in disadvantaged positions too often in a later video. For now, we're talking about how to play the fights when they happen, not so much why the fights even form. Alright, so that's how to fight Turnfighters, or some ways. What about fighting against all-rounders? We're fighting against kind of a medium airplane. It's good at some things. It's good at it's okay at turning and at going fast, but not the best at either one. If we're a Turnfighter and we have the advantage versus an enemy all-rounder, if they wander below you, they're food. This is, again, now you are in the position of giving them a rough time. So you just go in and grab your kill. If you are above them, you can reach them by diving, and you turn better. There is really nothing that can prevent you from just sticking to their rear and going for the kill. Unless, of course, they have enough of a gap to make an escape dive. And, you know, don't chase an escape dive that will break your wings or waste all your energy. But yeah, you know, play safe as you do. If they full dive away, pursuit might not be a good use of your time or even possible. But generally, if you're a Turnfighter above an all-rounder, this is easy stuff. This is, like, convenient. If you're an all-rounder here, this is a normal advantaged engagement. You're in similar planes, you have the energy advantage, go ahead and start a normal fight as you wish. Not much to note here. If you're in a boom and zoom plane, and you're facing an all-rounder who's has a lower energy state than you, they're below you, you're starting to dive in on them, it should be easier to do this than to fight an enemy Turnfighter who's below you, because they can't evade as weirdly, probably. But still avoid dogfighting. Even though they're not a Turnfighter, if they're an all-rounder, they probably still turn better than you if you're a boom and zoom plane. So avoid dogfighting here and make some nice attack passes. Just treat them like you would the Turnfighter, but it should be an easier time. Oh, and respect the fact that their speed may give them the ability to chase your escape runs more closely than a slow Turnfighter. What about neutral versus an all-rounder? This is like the bread and butter of a War Thunder fight. This is the most neutral thing possible. We're in a neutral energy state versus a plane that has kind of middle-of-the-road attributes. Well, if we're a Turnfighter, we have the option to push in and pressure them with our turn performance. They don't have the means to, use speed or energy to gain gaps easily. So if we see a chance to go and get stuck in a turn fight with them and they turn worse than we do, that's good for us. So that's a recommended thing to do. It's definitely fine if you're a turn fighter and you see an all-rounder in a neutral energy state to go in and pressure them into a dogfight, because you'll probably win. If you choose to do so, though, avoid head-ons when merging. Like if they're coming towards you, make sure you dip under or around that first head-on or whatever, so that you don't, just die as you're trying to approach them. Avoiding head-ons should be like a given at this point, unless I say otherwise specifically, or there's no other option. If you're an all-rounder, this is a fair fight. Similar planes, similar energy state. It's a normal fight. I don't have much to say here. If you're a boom and zoomer, I don't really recommend making attack passes on all-rounders with a boom and zoom plane if you don't have an energy advantage. So I would consider just leaving and trying to wait for somebody you do have an energy advantage over. Continue your climb, continue your cruise. Get out. Fighting an all-rounder as a B and Z when you start in a similar position, they're probably going to win that close fight, so I wouldn't do it. What if we're at a disadvantage and there's an enemy all-rounder above us coming in for a fight? If we're a turn fighter, this is concerning, but it's workable. It's definitely more workable than if we have an enemy turn fighter coming in from above. We attempt to force the all-rounder to waste energy. We're wary of their potential for more responsive aim, compared to B and Z at least, as they make attack passes. We're wasting their energy. And then eventually, if you can get them to get down and stuck in a dogfight, their patience is run thin, they're sick of having to go past you and spend 40 seconds turning around every time, and they want to just try for the dogfight, that's great. You want them to make that mistake, and then you can win because you turn better. If you are an all-rounder, this is a standard disadvantaged fight. Similar planes, they have an energy advantage. With proper evasive play and getting them to waste enough energy, you can turn it into a neutral fight. But again, evades are how you get them to waste their speed and altitude. So it's going to rely heavily on your mechanical skill. And if you're a boom and zoomer, this is really rough. Diving away might be harder than versus a turn fighter, because if they're an all-rounder, they probably have enough dive speed with their energy advantage to keep with you in the dive. So if it's possible, you can go for it, especially if you start it when they're very far away. But if not, you might have to attempt a disadvantaged dogfight. Just because a plane turns better than you does not mean they're guaranteed to beat you. Players can make mistakes, especially players who don't use flaps or don't use manual elevator or don't use their roll rate. Like, there are ways to win dogfights against... If people who turn better than you play wrong, they might not use their turn performance to its full potential. So you can punish them for that. So, attempting a disadvantaged fight sounds rough, but you can, every one of these engagements I'm talking about is winnable. Even the ones where I say it's concerning or it's rough, they can all be won. It depends on what your enemy does and how good you each are. Alright, let's talk about how to fight our last category of enemy, the boom and zoom airplane. Fast, but turns poorly. If you are a turn fighter, well, they're a brick. They can't turn well, and they're below you, so you can just go eat them. Avoid the head-on. Consider not chasing a full dive if they make one. It's simple to do that. If you're an all-rounder, this is something you're really good at. All-rounders are really, really good at getting rid of boom and zoom planes that have wandered below them or wandered into a less than high energy state because you have the speed to keep with your dive. You have more ability to follow a dive. You maybe have a little bit less ability to trivialize the dogfight, but this is a favorable fight for you. Pretty comfortable. And then if you're a boom and zoom, this is just a standard advantaged fight. They're a similar plane to you. You have more energy than they do. You can just chase them down whenever you want. Pretty comfortable. So neutral versus boom and zoom. If you're a turn fighter, once again, you can pressure them into a turn fight. They will have a rough time against you because they are not yet at a high enough speed or altitude compared to you to zoom past and make their escape. So you can totally engage this. I said consider engaging, but I would engage. I would actively say it's a good thing to engage a boom and zoomer who's not yet at an energy advantage over you. If you're a turn fighter, you have a chance to get rid of them before they spend minutes and minutes climbing and then come screaming down with insane speed. If you're an all-rounder, this is a favorable fight for you, so go ahead if you want. And if you're a fellow Boom and Zoom, this is, it's a neutral fight. Similar category of plane, similar start. It's a duel. Go ahead and take duels. Duels are fine. What if we are at disadvantage versus an enemy Boom and Zoom plane? Well, if we're a Turnfighter, we evade. This should be pretty comfortable. Most Boom and Zoom planes, many of them, they can't turn very sharply as they're in the middle of a very high-speed pass. So it shouldn't be too insanely difficult to evade this kind of attack. You go underneath them, you make sharp turns, you will learn what does and doesn't work for this as you play, but this is like a textbook example of the asymmetrical fight. They are the blue plane going into long straight lines and coming around after each one, and we are the little red plane who is dancing in place, evading each attack as it comes in. And then climbing in between. When they go up when they make an attack on you and they go out of it, and then they're in the middle of making their long turnaround to eventually come back, you can climb a little bit during that time to gain back some of the energy you lost when you made your initial dodge. That's totally fine. You can do that. Just make sure that by the time they do come back to fight you, you have put your nose down a bit and gotten enough speed to make a sharp and hard to aim at turn again as they make their next pass. There's a rhythm to this. This comes with practice. I'm just telling you the general principle. What your job to do is, as a Turnfighter against somebody who is making long Boom and Zoom attack passes, is to evade, and if you do it enough, they should either leave or waste enough energy that you can start to fight them in a normal way. If you're an all-rounder, similar role to a Turnfighter, you just happen to turn a little bit less well, but this might not even be that bad because your speed and engine power may actually give you an easier time dealing with them. You want them to lose their advantage, get stuck in a turn fight. Diving out might be a valid option here, depending on the matchup. And, diving out might also be a valid option even if you're a Turnfighter here, like if you're in the clipped wing, Spitfire, etc. Don't think that any of the techniques I'm listing here are limited to the specific plane type I put them under. If I say XYZ thing is good for a Boom and Zoomer to do, there still might be a situation in a mirror match or any matchup where that tactic might gain you something against a different kind of plane, or while using a different kind of plane. I'm just talking about kind of rough averages. And if you're a Boom and Zoomer and you're at a disadvantage versus an enemy Boom and Zoomer, you may or may not have the means to actually perform a proper weird evasive turn, like a sharp turn. So you can consider diving out pretty early, starting when they're far away from you. And if they waste enough energy by following your dive and or turning, whatever, you can turn this into a neutral fight, and it shouldn't be that bad. Certainly if you're a Boom and Zoomer, seeing an enemy Boom and Zoom above you is less of a problem than seeing enemy all-rounders or Turnfighters above you, close to you. So, those are some ways a fight can play out. Well, who gets to decide if the fight happens at all? This is kind of a side note, but I think it's relevant. I think it's worth knowing. Notice that if you have the advantage, if you're starting in an advantage energy state, normally the advantage player gets to decide whether the fight happens or not. So even if you're advantaged and you're looking at somebody and you think you could fight them, you also have the option to choose not to. But they don't have the option to say, no, I don't want to take this fight, if you go in on them. I mean, they might have the ability to dive away. But they normally will have, even if they're diving away, that's taking an action in response to you. You can force them to do something in response by starting with the advantage. In neutral states, the plane with the higher cruise speed has the power to decline the engagement by simply flying away. So, you might have noticed life is really rough for non-Turnfighters, especially for Boom and Zoomers. Like, in all of our engagements we've talked about, being the Turnfighter generally has more hope than not being the Turnfighter, on average. Like, Turnfighters can always get something done even if they're being engaged by somebody with way higher energy, because they have this ability to, dance around, make turns, make evasions, do tricky things that waste enemy energy and give you a chance. So that might make it seem like, oh, well, Turnfighters are just clearly the best because they have an easier time in most possible engagements. And that's sort of true, but an important advantage that cruise speed, or Boom and Zoom's cruise speed gives you, or all-rounder's cruise speed gives you, is the ability to choose whether fights happen or not. If you're in if you're in the P-47 and you're fighting a Zero, he might be an evasion god and like dodge every one of your attack passes. But guess what happens when you run out of ammo? You don't just die and lose. You're free to just fly away and fly back to your airfield, and then try again later. If you have the higher cruise speed and you have sufficient altitude and such to like make use of it, and you're not in a situation where they are temporarily diving way faster than you can cruise and you can't avoid it. You know, talking about neutral states, higher cruise speed means you get to pick whether the fight continues or not, you know, assuming you're not already stuck in it. You can decide who to engage, and they don't get to say no. If they're slower, if they're a slow Turnfighter, you engage them and they have to do something. So that's a pressure tool and like a piece of freedom that higher cruise speed gives you that turn performance does not. So it's like just a little nice thing you can have, that you should know that you have. Yeah, this all makes speed sound super strong, but in neutral, even though the higher speed plane can choose that the fight happens, the better turning plane will generally have a higher chance of winning. And yeah, notice the comfort level of Turnfighters. Turnfighters always, their game plan is always similar. It's to either dodge the enemy or to turn towards them and kill them. You don't have to plan out super fancy attack runs. You don't have to be super wary of things that can just enter a close fight with you and chop you up. You are the one who enters close fights and chops people up. And while, you know, I'm not saying Turnfighters are like easy mode to play, certainly good players in Boom and Zoom can get insane stuff done. And like, I know a lot of people who are more experienced at the game are probably face-palming at some of these ideas that I'm talking about. This idea that like Boom and Zoom is bad or something, because it's super good. But this ties into comfort level. I talked about nation choice in video 1. I talked about why it's more comfy to choose the UK, Britain, or Italy, or Japan, and that's because their planes lean more towards this end of the spectrum where you turn. And that's normally, for new players, just more comfortable and intuitive of a way to play. There are less situations where you have to think ahead and use caution to make the proper escape. So that should make a little more sense for the nation suggestions too. All right. Well, you're probably saying at this point, Blade, I know you're telling me how to play versus all these matchups, but what if I see a red dot on my screen, an enemy player, and his plane is called an MB5, and I don't have any idea what that is, whether it turns well, whether it goes fast or slow, what it's capable of, what kind of guns it has. I have no idea. Well, playing versus unfamiliar planes, there are hundreds and hundreds of prop planes in War Thunder, like a few hundred at least. There's a lot. This is part of the learning process that I can't really just explain to you all in one video. It would take far too long. So a safe option, if you see a plane you are not familiar with, is to treat them as if they're good at everything. So only take an engagement where an unexpected quality of their plane would not kill you. So like if you assume they're fast and good at turning, well, even if they're fast, they're not going to be fast all the time. So you can wait for them to be low and slow fighting an ally and then, you know, make a dive pass and just boom and zoom on them. Like, if you do that, it doesn't matter if they turned out to be a boom and zoomer, or they turned out to be a Turnfighter, they turned out to be an all-rounder. If they are currently in the position of being, you know, below you and slower, and you just make an attack pass on them without committing to a fight, you're not going to be blindsided by some quality of their plane, because their energy state is already in a place such that you have the advantage regardless of what their airframe can do. That's not always possible, I know. It might be an unknown plane coming in from above, and you're just going to have to learn by experience in a lot of cases here. But you can try assuming traits based on their nation. If they're an American plane that you're not familiar with, you can assume they might be similar to other US planes. If they're a Japanese plane that you're not familiar with, you can assume they're similar to other Japanese planes. They're probably a Turnfighter. That's not always the case. There are big exceptions, like the P-59 is a US plane. You would think it's a boom and zoomer. It's really like an extremely good Turnfighter, and people get blindsided by that. Every time you die to something, though, that you don't know, that you're not familiar with, you can try looking it up. Go on the War Thunder wiki, go on Wikipedia and look at like the real life, what the plane was. You know, you can try to look for them in the tech tree, although some planes that were previously offered in the past are no longer visible in the tech tree viewer. They're just going to be on the wiki or something. And also, never trust stat cards. If you're looking at a plane, you're trying to assess. Don't try to learn what planes are good and bad at by what the stat cards say. Like when the stat cards say XYZ, you know, 689 kilometers an hour top speed and 20.1 second turn. Those stat card measurements are wrong. Turn times are not accurate. Top speeds might be theoretically accurate, but they rarely are actually accurate for what the average speeds they'll be moving at are in a real battle. Don't trust stat cards beyond giving you maybe a vague idea of top speed. Like, at most. Maybe a vague idea of top speed and a vague idea of climb rate. Stat cards are wrong. That's not a good way to study. You study planes mostly by flying them yourself, or by seeing somebody fly them, or dying to them. Well, what if you're playing versus a fully superior enemy? There will be some situations in this game where the enemy plane does everything you do but better. So you're in a Turnfighter, you're fighting a fellow Turnfighter, but they're even more of a Turnfighter. They turn even better, and they cruise even faster, and they roll even better, and they, you know, you're in a Spitfire Mark V, and the enemy has some Lend-Lease Premium Spitfire Mark 9. Like, what do? They basically are close to doing everything better, or they do. Well, I did warn you about this in the disclaimer at the start of video 1. War Thunder is not actually a fair game. You will face situations where you have no advantage or like playmaking capacity that will actually win the fight for you. However, human error or the lack thereof can still influence the outcome. It doesn't matter if they're in a better plane than you, if they're terrible at the game and they don't have good aim or reflexes or like decision making and they just can't win the fight anyway. That can happen. And if you do think that they're a good player, and they're probably going to methodically exploit their advantage against you to kill you, you can try doing something unexpected, like something really dumb but surprising. Like if they're in a better version of a Spitfire, and you're in a Spitfire, well, maybe you try, as they're coming in to chase you, you put on your landing flaps, and you make an extremely rapid turn towards them, and try to take like a super close range head-on while breaking off your landing flaps. Like, that is a really dumb idea. I definitely don't recommend trying to intentionally break off your flaps to make a rapid turnaround to head on somebody. That's like not a good tactic. But if you are dead certain that they're going to abuse their advantage against you to kill you if you try to play normally, because they will just play normally too, sometimes you can try doing something dumb but surprising to catch them off guard and, you know, turn around the fight. But again, good players will also be even ready for that, so you're kind of, like, you're objectively just screwed, stat-wise, if somebody has a better plane than you in every way. But only in a small percentage of cases will that actually end up being unwinnable, because much of the time the enemy will not be a perfect or even that good of a player. This is not as harsh as it used to be, because fewer players are, like, try-harding at the game now. In 2018-19, like 2017-18 maybe, mid-tier air RB props, it used to be really it used to get pretty sweaty, especially in like Russian versus German matchups where people like knew how to fly both their planes and there's no American players like mowing the lawn. Things used to get crazy. But now it's pretty common on a team of 12 that only like 2 of the players are experienced and know how to play well, and then the rest are a varying mix of really bad to mediocre. So it's not as harsh as it used to be, because fewer people are good at the game and playing carefully and mindfully enough to really use this advantage if they have it. A note about bomber hunting. We briefly discussed respecting bomber turrets in video number 1. Generally, don't worry about killing bombers until the end of the game. Once again, don't fly directly behind bombers. Don't fly into their turrets. I've put it down 3 times because it's, again, new players do it a lot. Don't do it. It's really easy to not do it. The safest angle to attack a bomber from most of the time is from the front and below, since their own plain 3D model will get in the way of turret aim, and the turrets there tend to be weaker. Take your time to set up a safe kill angle. Bombers are normally slower than you, so you can relax and pick a good position to start the fight from. And if you don't make the kill in one pass, don't chase them. Just reset and get a good angle again. Again, don't fly behind bombers. They are slower than most fighters most of the time. There are exceptions. Just play carefully and attack them from anywhere that's not behind them, and you'll generally be fine. And once you've made your kill, brief reminder, remember step 6 of video 1. Remember that after you've made your kill, no matter what technique you used to make the kill or win the fight, or what strategy you used, your job after the fight is over is to look for your next position of advantage. And if you can't find the next position of advantage, you need to look at least for your next engagement. So remember, after you finish a kill, default back to looking for a position of advantage if you can get one. And if you can't, well, at that point, you're probably ending up in a new fight, and you'll approach it from there. Okay, that was a lot of specifics. We talked about so many different possibilities there, and you might be feeling overwhelmed, like, how am I going to remember all of these possible things and what I should do in every situation? You don't actually have to do that. What these are all aimed at is getting you to understand concepts. So what are the concepts of taking fights in War Thunder from various starting energy states and against various enemy types using various plane types of our own? Well, before we enter a fight, consider what our relative energy state is, what plane we're flying, and what plane we're flying against. If we know we can turn better than our enemy, we should prefer a dogfight. This applies in Turnfighter versus Allrounder, Turnfighter versus Boom and Zoom, All-Rounder versus Boom and Zoom, All-Rounder versus a different All-Rounder that turns a little bit worse. All of those different kinds of situations can be boiled down to an extent, we turn better, so we want to dogfight them. And if we know we turn worse, we should prefer an asymmetrical fight, a Boom and Zoom fight, a fight where we go in straight lines, and we use our speed to avoid getting stuck in a dogfight. Unless, of course, creating one is for some reason impossible, then we have to just do our best in the dogfight that forms. So don't feel like you have to remember every specific possible way to engage an enemy and what you can and cannot do and what might or might not be good. You need to understand the concepts, and me showing you this one slide is not going to be enough to give you a full sense of what decision you should be intending towards in game situations. But these are the concepts. If you turn better, prefer the dogfight. If you turn worse, prefer to not dogfight, and to fight in a different way, if you can. And of course, if you do turn better than the enemy, and you go in intending to make a dogfight, and they just don't react to you properly, and you just kill them on the first pass, then you don't have to keep doing a loop or whatever. You can just return to whatever you were doing before. Yeah, simple stuff. Let's move along. Okay, I'm going to splice in a video example here. I think I will probably only have maybe one video example or two for this one. It would be impossible, or not practical at least, for me to try and get every possible type of matchup I've talked about as a video clip, because I just don't want to play the game that much to get that much footage. I'm already spending a lot of hours on just making this content. But I will have an example. I'll have a video example that at least includes a couple of the situations we were in. Something where I, pause it and I talk about what each engagement is before I start it, and then we'll look at that. Okay, let's look at our first example game. We are moving now in this series from a format of live commentating as I play to a format of looking at replays afterwards with the ability to pause, go forwards and backwards, and see things as many times as we want. I believe this is a better format for teaching the advanced concepts I'm talking about, or, well, not that advanced yet. And just better for clarity, and also it allows me to spend less time trying to commentate a bunch of games. I can just focus on playing, and then sifting through my footage later to find good examples of each principle. So, and know that I'm not trying to claim that every single game I play is as good as the ones I will pick here. There are definitely games where I spawn in, I climb, and then it so happens that somebody plays better than me in the merge and I die without getting anything done. So I'm not trying to mislead you by only showing off my high kill games or whatever. But I do want to show you doing things right and doing things in a way that is effective so that you will believe that what I am telling you can be effective, and it can. So just understand that. Let's look at game number 1 here. In game number 1, we're flying a BF-109 F4 trop. Basically just a BF-109 F4. So first of all, before I even look at the engagements, what category of plane do we fit into? Well, the BF-109 is kind of an odd case. Some people say it's a boom and zoom. I would say it leans more towards being an all-rounder. It's very capable at the boom and zoom role, but it definitely has the ability to dogfight a fair number of the opponents it faces, especially certain American aircraft, such as the P-47, the Mustang. The Typhoon is a British plane, but it can dogfight that pretty well. I don't want to list too many, or else somebody's going to come at me with the specific turn rate stats. But the 109, we will consider this, for our purposes, an all-rounder in this game, since we have some solid dogfighting capability that, falls towards the middle of the road in terms of turning performance. So let's look at how we play the engagements in this game. We've been climbing since we spawned in. We're ending up in a position that has lots of energy, high altitude, and this I-185, we decide to engage him. He's only a little bit below us. So, what are our energy states? I'm pausing here so we can consider what the energy states are. We just stopped climbing and only barely started to push our nose down. This guy also just recently stopped climbing. We are a little bit above, but this is almost a neutral state. We might have some energy advantage, but it's not a lot. So what kind of engagement is this? Well, let's look back at the slides here. I don't actually need them to know how to play this out, but I want to make sure I'm consistent with what I said before. So this is approximately neutral versus enemy all-rounder. And what did we say to do if we are an all-rounder? This is a duel with no starting advantage for either side. Engage in a normal fight if you wish. So we could try to go for a normal fight. But what do I happen to know about the I-185 compared to the BF-109? Well, this plane turns well. It probably turns a little better than us. So in this situation, we're both all-rounders, but I am more of a boom and zoomer. I am more of a non-turning speed plane, and he is more of a turning plane. And in B and Z versus neutral, enemy all-rounder, I don't suggest making attack passes, since we don't have an energy advantage to enable our escape if a dogfight forms, so we consider leaving. But leaving may not be an option at this point. Since he's already 2.2 away, we're heading towards him and we're on similar energy. So let's see how this plays out. Alright, that was just a moment of action there. Let's look at that again, and I'll pause it as I go to talk about what is happening and why. We engage the I-185, we zoom in, and we see him facing his plane directly towards us. At this point, it seems apparent that he wants a head-on. What do? We don't accept head-ons. Not when we have the option to, do something else to win a fight, or to escape a fight. So we are going to try to evade this. And which way do we evade? Well, we want to go below him, like we talked about earlier, because it is harder for him to look down than to look up at this kind of speed, normally. So we go under. Your results, honestly, he could have killed me there. That was not my greatest evade. But thankfully, your enemies don't have perfect aim, so you don't always have to evade perfectly either. It's more important that you try. You'll learn as you go. So now what are our energy states like? He's coming around. This guy is full turning to come back and chase me. This gives us an energy advantage. He spent some of his energy to make what is basically a complete U-turn. He flipped all the way around and is now going the opposite direction of where he started. So even though we started neutral, he will be almost certainly unable to catch us here because all we've done is a minor evasive motion and continued our course, and he has made a full turn. So letting him make that pass, making an evade, and letting him waste energy to turn to chase has gotten rid of the pesky neutral stalemate and given us a slight energy advantage. What do we see, though, when we look behind ourselves? We see not only is the I-185 1.3-ish away and falling back, we see a J-21 2 kilometers away on the left, we see a Yak-3 a little over 2 kilometers away, more towards the center of our screen here, still on our left. So if we were to go back and try to capitalize in some way on the energy loss the I-185 just had by diving back onto him, we would be eaten alive by these two fighters. This goes more into game sense, but the reason I don't pursue the fight with that one player is because these two enemies are nearby, ready to mop up if we get stuck in a 1v1. And I believe we're not going to watch these games in full. That wouldn't be practical. It's time-wise.
Counterattack.
What do? We continue on our way. And now we have an engagement against this lonely P-51. This is a super boring fight. This guy doesn't even make any evasive motions. Nothing much will be learned here. We even try to save ammo on him. He's pushing so much. We'll learn there. Okay, the rest of the fight, though. We come back to the battlefield. We were out on a little, killing the P-51. Now the I-185 is way below us. So in this situation, we're advantage versus all-rounder, and we are totally free to dive in and make attack passes here. This is a great position for us. However, wing rep starts to come into play. Notice my wings are shaking. I'm going past 700. I put myself at... I even have the red text in the top left. I am getting really close to my wing rip speed, since I was coming from so high up after shooting down that P-51. I'm at 0% engine throttle and pulling up, and I still was gaining speed, getting dangerously close to my wing rip. You probably don't want to do what I just did there. That was close. But we notice, we break off our attack, and now, here's a fun question. We're going 640 kilometers an hour, very close to our own wing rip speed, and we're looking a little bit upwards at a J-21 here. Are we in an advantageous, neutral, or disadvantaged energy state compared to this J-21 who we've seen making turns and fighting people, but who is above us? I think we may actually have an energy advantage. He is higher, but we have all this speed that we can convert immediately back into altitude and probably still arrive with more speed left than he currently has. So I would say advantageous to neutral, but even though we're below him temporarily as part of our dive, I don't think we have an energy disadvantage versus this J-21. We're not going to necessarily fight him right now, and then who's more apparent. Why did we switch targets there? Well, we had two fighters below us. They both have similar energy states. They're both below, making turns, but the J-21 made this move where he went upwards to kill an ally of ours, and this is like him presenting a free shot to us. So even though we were initially looking at the I-185 and wanting to make that kill first, because we see him as the bigger threat, and because we already started engaging him earlier. This guy suddenly, like, pops out of nowhere, not out of nowhere, but pops up, slowing himself down, coming up into our line of fire. We don't have to burn as much energy to go downwards to shoot this guy compared to the I-185, so we switch targets because he's basically just offering us a free kill. And we can be opportunistic here. That's totally okay. And at this point, 109 cannons, yeah.
The victory is near.
How's our energy state now? 560 kph, dive. He's below us, but he's got a lot of speed of his own. I think we have a slight energy advantage. We're trying to push into the fight to make an attack pass. But do we have enough of an energy advantage that we are completely untouchable? That we'd be instantly gone when we pull out of our pass? I don't think so. There's definitely still a risk here. And this is also something you will learn when you're slowly chasing people down. And you're just a little bit faster than they are, but not much. It's not always worth doing this. If there was a situation where there were more enemies in the center of the map that were playing actively and being a threat, it might not be worth spending like a long time making a making a dive slowly catching up to a single enemy. But he's the most active enemy player at the moment, and we're already engaged. We miss our attack pass, and we decide to full commit to the dogfight. The fact that we're immediately turning around to go towards him, instead of continuing in a straight line to escape, we're full committing to this fight. We're not leaving it. Why do we do that? Well, we have an ally. We have an ally F6C. I think that's some kind of Mustang variant. It's newer than... this is a very recent plane that I'm not used to yet. I think it's some variant of the Mustang. Regardless of what he is, he's engaging the I-185 right now. And he's holding his attention. So even though we turn a little bit, I believe, a little bit worse than this plane, and this guy's been a threatening and competent enemy player, who we'd normally not want to take this 1v1 with in a dogfight context, when we could instead make it asymmetrical, we are going to engage anyway to take advantage of this 2 versus 1, to make it hard for him to maneuver against both of us at once. That's very, very difficult to do when we're on different angles. And look, he tries to... Why doesn't he dive? He probably knows I'm here. Why doesn't he dive? Because he's trying to go up and fight our teammate. We can use our teammate as bait. Our teammate being above is bait for this enemy to go upwards, which is an easy-to-hit motion, instead of downwards, or at a weird angle, which would be harder to hit. And then he does realize, once we're really close and firing, he reacts and tries to pull down. This is the right move out of the I-185 at this point. I mean, the more right move would have been to do something different to avoid this situation to begin with. But if he's already in it, this is the kind of the right move out of him. To start going downwards, instead of just trying to float up into a stall and become a completely free shot. But we're already close enough, maneuverable enough, and dialing in our guns that even if he makes some weird motions downwards, we can just finish maneuvering in for the kill. Do we have one more here? We do, but this is an interesting kill. Is this a kill we learned something from? Not really. We're just flying in sideways in a P-51. Again, you notice how easy it is. This is a lesson to take from this game. Notice how easy it is when somebody flies up to kill them. And I know someone's going to call this a kill steal. I was just trying to get as much footage as possible, and I've had kills stolen from me so many times that I normally just gun for it when somebody's on fire. Nobody else in War Thunder is going to respect when I set someone on fire either. Yeah, make of that what you will. If you really want your own kills, just secure them yourself. It's totally possible. to just use enough of your own ammo to full kill the enemy. And assists give a similar amount of research points anyway. So beyond like a slight blow to this person's ego, they're not actually like losing out on grind because I finished the kill. Oh wait, no, I don't even steal. I talk about kill stealing and then I actually just went for the assist. Alright, that's reasonable. He dies to somebody else. Okay. Game 1. 3 kills, 1 assist. This commentary on this one game's getting pretty long already, so I'll cut it here. But hopefully that was useful in some way. Let's move to the next one. Hello. Welcome to the commentary on Game 2. We're flying the P-47N-15 this time. What category do we fit into? Pretty firmly into boom and zoomer. You could make a marginally plausible argument for the P-47N-15 leaning into all-rounder territory due to its somewhat okay turn performance sometimes. I won't be considering that relevant here, especially with the opposition we face in this game. We are basically always going to be firmly in the role of boom and zoomer, faster but much worse at turning. Let's look at how we play it out. Game starts, climb happens. Nothing too interesting for the beginning. Why did we engage? The C-205 is kind of an all-rounder airplane. It turns a good bit better than us. It's dangerous to us if we get in a dogfight. We have a neutral-ish enemy energy state. We're at a similar altitude, a roughly similar speed. So why is it that we're engaging and kind of breaking our own rules by engaging an all-rounder in a boom and zoomer, even though we don't have an energy advantage? Look at that guy named Dingus Mobile. That's an allied fighter. Kind of an all-rounder allied fighter. Going up to start a dogfight. We are engaging because another kind of advantage you can have, besides your own, energy state, playing capacity, is what your teammates are doing. And this is going to be more of a Video 3 topic, but I want you to know that I'm not going to hold myself back from doing things that I haven't talked about yet, but I am going to try to at least note why going into it in earlier videos. So, we're going in here when we normally wouldn't, because there's an ally to distract him and make him turn in awkward ways and not put his full attention on us. But we are still not going to full commit to a dogfight. We're not going to go and start just joining the furball fun, because we will maybe still die if we do that. We are just taking advantage of this to make an attack pass while he's busy. Oh my gosh, that was a weird coding. So we're pushing, he's above us, but we're pushing our nose down a little bit, even though he's up there. Why, if he's up here, at the top of the screen, why are we pushing our nose down? Because we're trying to get speed for our escape, and also speed that will allow us to move our aim around better. Get enough speed that we can very comfortably snap our guns around, approach him faster. We're aiming a little below him with the intent of adjusting our course towards where we need to fire at once we're proper close. This is pretty standard for doing so. Oh. He tried to offer a head-on there. He didn't full commit to it, but we thought there was a risk of a head-on. So look what we're doing. Our plane's pointing down. We're going a little bit down and out of that head-on. It wasn't really a super threatening head-on. He didn't actually try to fire at us in the head-on. But we were worried about the risk, and so we made some kind of evade and broke off our attack anyway. That's a cautious play. Cautious plays can keep you alive.
Take him
Around.
down.
We are wary of the enemies to our left, but they are 7 kilometers away. The earliest they will be here is after, like, 15 or 20 seconds-ish? No. Longer. We're aware of them, but they're not enough of a problem yet to make it a bad decision for us to pick up the C-205 if we can. Plus, he is heading away from them, so even our escape route would not be too different from the direction we're heading here to engage the C-205. What should he have done here? If this was a good player with good awareness, what would they have done? They're 1 kilometer out from a heavily armed P-47 boom and zoom aircraft that is pulling in behind them. What could he do to make our life hard? I think it would be to immediately go for a full dive. A full dive, and probably a full dive at a slight diagonal angle while curving towards where we're coming from. Like to go behind us. If at 1.1 kilometers out, let's rewind a tiny bit, if he had realized his situation right at this moment, at 1.11 or whatever, maybe even a little more, and he had pushed his nose down and gone for a tricky evade that dips under my nose, that would be like something good to do. A lot better than what he does here, which is to kind of continue his course. And then when he evades, look at this. He's now aware that we're firing on him, but he goes up to evade. Do you know what going up does? Going up does not increase your speed. Going up is going in the direction that's easiest for a plane to turn towards. It's easier for planes to point their guns more up when they're already coming in to make a pass on you. He goes up, and then he sort of starts to go sideways, but he's hardly going down. This guy has the capacity to turn much more sharply. If he had gone, I wish I could draw on the screen, but you see where my right wingtip is? If he had gone like straight down there, like straight down below my right wingtip instead, he had full pushed his nose down instead of doing this awkward up and then sideways thing. See, he finally is starting to invert and go downwards, but now it's so predictable. Now it's so predictable that he's going to gradually shift towards going down that we have rolled our plane over. And when you roll your plane over, suddenly up for you, the way that it's easy for you to turn, is, well, the way that you've adjusted for. Oh, that looks terrible. I need to slow down. So we roll our plane over, and now from our perspective, he's basically still going up. This is not hard to turn towards. We roll our plane over to follow. We get a hit. We just keep casually following it. It's a critical hit. He's so damaged now that I don't even know if he can turn better than us anymore. And we just completely light him up, and we decide that he's been fired on enough that he's just gone. This situation is still dangerous for us. Even though this guy is on fire, and probably going to die very soon, he is 0.4 from our tail, and he has shown that he's still capable of maneuvering his plane, and he probably still has ammo in his guns. Don't let people who you've set on fire, like, kill you back and drag you down with them. We are wary of this guy. Yeah, see, I almost instinctively wanted, let's see that again. I instinctively wanted to go up for a second. Right there, I want to go up because I want to return to climbing. Then I realize that he's dangerous, on our tail, on fire, but still able to shoot. And then we push our nose back down to open up the gap. If you're opening the gap against a Turnfighter, wiggle your tail. Look what we're doing. We're wiggling our tail up and down just a tiny bit. Just little adjustments so that you can't just lock in and get the long-range kill. And now we have successfully, from a starting neutral enemy state, but with, to be fair, with an ally distracting, killed a plane that turns much, much better than us with a plane that turns worse. By not... we refused... At no point in this entire engagement did we commit to a close dogfight with the C-205. We made one long attack pass to start, then we went up and around gradually, came back in for a second attack pass, and adjusted our fire a little bit as we came in. But we were always... we were never committed to going in complete circles in a slow dogfight that we would lose. This was an asymmetrical battle between this all-rounder, which is more of a Turnfighter in this context, because he's the better turning plane compared to us, and we turn worse, so we don't win by turning. We win by doing other things. And we try to convert our speed back into energy, potential energy, stored energy, by going up. What kind of engagement is this? Well, the Ki-44 is a Turnfighter. Almost a pure Turnfighter. Far slower than us. Far, far, far better at turning. How are we going to engage? Not by getting into a close dogfight, that's for sure. And look at this. He knows what's hard to aim at, to an extent. He goes under our nose and we can't adjust fast. Now, many P-47 players I've seen would right now, instead of we're diving away from him, they would start turning back. They would go towards this guy to try and go loopy-loop around with him in dogfight. We are definitely not going to do that. And of course we lose spotting, because spotting mechanics in this game are complete nonsense. Which makes it hard to explain what I'm doing. There he is again. So they're above us. The LA-5 and the Ki-44 both turn better than us, and they're both above us. How do we get out? Well, cruise speed. Even though he's above us, we have enough leftover energy. If he's 2.9 away, we are at 1,200 meters. He's significantly above us, but he's also slower. If at any point this guy decided to try to turn his altitude into speed and dive in, he can't dive that fast. He's a Turnfighter that's not at all focused on being fast, or doesn't have the capacity to go that fast outside of dives. And even in dives, it dives worse than we do. If he starts the dive, we can just use our remaining altitude. We can start diving ourselves and just leave. So why do we feel comfortable climbing here? We're doing kind of like a high-speed climb, even though there's a Turnfighter above and behind us, because he is far enough behind us that if he started to make an aggressive motion, we could comfortably push our nose down and do an escape dive that would not be possible for him to catch. So this is fine. We're not going to let him close enough to kill us. We can just take our sweet time and continue to run away and try to make the energy states less in his favor and ideally in our favor. So this is a long section of the video for sure. We like run away, we run away, we run away, we run away for minutes and minutes and minutes. We've been running away from this guy for like multiple minutes in a row. This might feel boring, but if you want to play boom and zoomers, planes that can't dogfight things, or can almost not dogfight anything, you have to understand that this is part of the playstyle you chose. Part of the playstyle of a plane that can't turn well is to not throw away their lives by trying to turn against something that turns better. We can't beat a Ki-44 in a close fight, so we will never take it, even if it means, you know, running away for minutes on end. And look at that. He broke off. He was at 2 kilometers. Now he's leaving. Notice how the label, the distance label, starts rapidly ticking away. This guy has turned around and is leaving. So now we have an opening.
The enemy's getting closer to victory.
He just used a bunch of his speed to make a U-turn to go backwards. Now we can use some of our energy to make a turn to go backwards and not, you know, lose a ton in comparison. He already did it. We know he spent a lot of speed on that. Now we feel comfortable heading in his direction. And we keep climbing. Now he's coming back in. But we've already gained a decent energy state. We're now on similar altitudes, and I believe we should have higher speed here. So we're comfortable going in for an attack run now. We have the energy to do so. We have the energy to make an attack run, and then to also escape without letting him drag us into a close range fight. We now can make a pass at a high enough speed that he won't just trivially slot onto our tail on our way out and kill us with extreme ease from a close range. We're not committing to a full dogfight, we're just making an attack run. And to be fair, that was pretty lucky to get that one fire. But we could repeat this. We could repeat this if we weren't able to get the fire on this first pass. We could repeat this as many times as needed. If we, as we come in here, you know, we're making a high-speed attack run, we're not getting into a fight, we're just making a nice, normal attack, we set him on fire. If we hadn't set him on fire, the situation would just be one where he's above and behind us again, but we're faster. And that's what we had a few minutes ago when we started our running away. So if we had failed to kill him on this first attack run, which we do not, we actually do kill him here, you can repeat this process as many times as is needed. Be patient. When you are the boom and zoomer, especially, be patient. You have the speed to run away for as long as you would like, and they can't stop you from doing it. What else happens in this game? Well, we have to get back to the battlefield. Oh, yeah, we have an engagement here against Focke-Wulf 190, who's chasing our ally low. Huge advantage here. Notice how I'm at 0% engine throttle, or well, I was a second ago. For a lot of this dive, I'm at 0% engine throttle because I am coming from such extreme altitude. They're like basically touching the ground. I am coming from such extreme altitude that if I use my engine on my way down, it's just gonna be more trouble than it's worth to have that much power and speed pushing me down towards my wing rip speed. If you already know you're gonna like be towards your wing rip speed limit without your engine just by using gravity, you don't need to have your engine on. You know, because we're burning all of our energy to get down to the deck at a combat speed. But we don't want to cross the wing rip threshold as we do so. And if having our engine on would push us over the threshold or require us to make more energy bleeding movements on our way down, more turns and stuff, just have it off. There's no need to have it on if we want to be arriving at a speed that doesn't require it anyway. And even with it off, we're like pushing past 700. This plane's wing rip speed, though, is like over 800, so it's no big deal. That's also kind of a trick I did there, like an aim trick. It might have looked bad, but Focke-Wulf 190s in a lot of planes, look what he's doing. He's doing this like weird rolling thing. He's doing this weird rolling thing that's not centered. It's like a roll that's not around his center of mass. It's like a snap roll or a roll that involves rudder use. That's super awkward for a lot of people to aim at, but we refuse to try and aim specifically at it. We just sort of aim at the center of where he approximately is, and just keep constantly firing, and then he eventually passes through our bullets. This is a valid way to kill people. If they're doing something super weird that you find super awkward to aim at, just aim kind of at the center of like the wiggling or wobbling or circling motion. Aim roughly in the center. Like we just aim in the center, and we just kind of sweep our guns around a bit, and like some of them will get it.
Is winning. We've got to counterattack.
Blah blah blah. Get some AI. Those are not real players. Those are AI planes. Okay, so why I'm coming down here, and at this point in the game, I'm shooting ground targets. What am I doing? Aren't I disregarding my own advice to always have altitude and to always be high in the sky? Well, look at the tickets. Look at the points of the team, the top bars. The blue bar is tiny, the red bar is huge. The enemy has way more points than us, and there's only a few minutes left on the game's clock. If the enemy wants, he can win by just sitting on his airfield defended by his anti-aircraft guns and letting himself win on points. So I feel here that I am forced to engage the ground targets to try and tip the points back in our favor. And to engage ground targets, you have to be next to the ground. And generally going pretty slow. You will naturally become slow while you do it as the result of turning around to get a lot of different small targets in a small area. So we're disadvantaged here not because I thought it was a great idea to fly at low altitude versus the one remaining enemy fighter, but because there was the possibility that he would sit and just win the game passively on points. I felt that before I went and fought him, I had to engage with, the objective, the point system of the game, the ground targets to get points back for us. Some people might think it's better to just climb anyway and wait till the last minute, but there were a lot of points to be dealt with. So this was the choice I made in this context.
Enemy will win.
And I also just find it more fun to shoot at ground targets than to try and chase somebody who might be base camping anyway. But he's not base camping. This guy's an LA5. That's an all-rounder fighter that turns very well and is very good at a lot of things at low altitude, like almost everything at low altitude. This is a terrible fight for us. We're going in with a huge, huge disadvantage. We have no way of just making an attack run on this guy without getting stuck in a dogfight. We're going to get stuck in a dogfight no matter what. So what do? Well, I sort of try to go for a head-on. I miss-aim. I could have totally killed him there if I used rudder better. I miss-aim my, head-on-ish attack, and I can't possibly get away from him. I am way too slow. Also, we're heading towards his base. But look at that. Look how fast he's catching up. 1.10, 1.6, 1. We have to turn in, because otherwise they'll just catch us. So we turn worse, we just have to try anyway. This is a fight that I believe, even when I started, I believe, if this guy knows how to play the game, I believe I will lose. But I'm still trying, because there is a chance that, he makes a mistake. Gives us an open that shouldn't be given. Or does something easily killable. It can happen. But we're always, as we do this, dipping our nose down towards the ground, staying out of his guns. And here, we make a fatal error. Let's see where the fatal error happened. I'm not a perfect player. I made a fatal error here. And I'm showing it to you because I believe there is something to be learned from it. Right here. Our plane's heading upwards at only 211 kilometers an hour. We are super close to our stall speed. We're like, basically, we're 171. We are basically stalling out right now. We are practically stalling out. And when you're close to stalling out, your control inputs don't do a lot. Your plane's gonna start flopping around on its own very shortly. This is a bad situation. So what should I do? What I probably should do is immediately turn my plane right side up. I should roll to my right, or my left, it doesn't even matter. I should roll my plane back right side up and avoid the ground. But what do I instead do? I try to do this I try to like chase him as if we're in the middle of the sky. I try to chase onto his tail as if we have plenty of sky space and speed. We don't have speed. We don't have space. So when I was let's see it. This turn's fine. We have the speed to make it. This is an attack. So when I was here, even, and I saw that I was below 200 kilometers an hour, instead of thinking, this is a good time to slot onto the enemy's tail and make a kill, I should have instead thought, I'm at dangerous risk of stalling. I need to flip back over and get out. And I haven't flown, in my defense, I have not flown the P-47N in like 2 years. And I kind of don't remember like how it handles at low speed. But still, this is definitely my fault that I crash. This was not necessary at all. But there's something to learn. This helps hammer the point home I'll just let it happen. This helps hammer the point home I was making earlier about do not let your speed drop below 200 into stall speed range while you're doing stuff near the ground, because it's so easy to just kill yourself in that scenario. Your plane does not respond as you are normally used to. You can't do normal things. Anyway, that's game 2. It had I think the best thing in this game was the example of engaging 2 different fighters that turned better than us using a boom and zoom aircraft and refusing to take a normal dogfight with them. So that's the main takeaway to have from this P-47 replay. Alright, welcome back from the video examples. Let's talk about a summary and some homework if you're so inclined. So, in summary, winning fights is the core air RB skill, and it's actually a complex set of multiple skills combined. I would say there's really no substitute for experience in this area. I can talk about principles of how to fight in certain matchups, but really you're going to have to play and pay attention to how your fights go and get experience with this. You know, the best indicator I've seen of skill in War Thunder is hour count. Whatever your stat card says how many days you have in fighters, the people who have 120 days in fighters beat the people who have, 15 days in fighters, who beat the people who have 2 days in fighters, who beat the people who have 4 hours in fighters. Like, you have to spend time to become good, no matter how much theory you know. Try to be aware of energy states constantly. So even before you're engaging in fights, during the fight, be aware of energy. When the fight starts, be aware of energy. But also, even like long before you're in a fight, you can kind of look around at the battlefield and try to think, all right, that guy's at X altitude and seems to be going sideways at, such and such speed. Try to estimate how much energy they have and whether you'd have an advantage if you fought them right now, and which of your teammates they do and don't have an energy advantage over. Realizing what speeds and altitudes people are at and kind of what state they're currently in terms of what they could choose to do next. It's important, and we'll talk about this more in the flow of the game in a video soon, one of the later ones. Also start trying to build a sense of which planes go into which category. Again, when you're brand new, you're not going to know that Spitfires turn better than Mustangs, that Focke-Wulf 190s can dive faster than BF 109s. This is non-obvious, but you will inevitably build a sense of it as you play the game and play different planes and play against different planes and read and watch content about even the planes in real life. Not all planes have accurate flight models to how they performed in real life, but normally they're close-ish, so you can use the real historical roles of planes and what they were good and bad at as a rough guide to what they might be good and bad at in War Thunder. And yeah, your homework for this video is to keep fighting enemy players, but with these kinds of concepts in mind. Energy, advantage, disadvantage, or neutral when starting. What kind of plane are you? What kind of plane are they? And you're definitely now allowed to take neutral fights when you're in the right plane for it and you think you can win. You don't have to follow all these suggestions for each matchup to the letter. Some of them might even be wrong, I'm not sure. But the main thing I'm trying to get across is that you need to have a plan when you enter a fight. Experience will give you this sense of, even before the fight starts, you have a rough idea of what will probably happen, how things will go, and how you can plan for that and play around it to become a better player. So, if you leave this video with nothing else, leave this video with the idea that before each time you fight somebody, you should consider, what are your energy states when the fight starts? What kind of plane are you in? What kind of plane are they in? And then go ahead and play out the fight, and then afterwards think about what happened and why, and what you could do to make it happen differently if you didn't like the way that it happened that time, or how you could repeat it if you liked the way that the fight happened. Anyway, fly safe, fight mindfully, pay attention to what's going on. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.